So, boy, am I happy to see everybody here tonight. It's a full house. Welcome. Welcome. I hope you feel happy as I do, I gotta say. I met the woman to my right a couple of weeks ago when a group of women, is this buzzing and bothering anybody? No. I belong to this women's group, a pretty kick-ass group, and we went to Montgomery, Alabama for an immersion in things historic and today. And it was very intense, as it should be, and to the person, every visitor in that city seems to walk out saying, wow, every American should see this, shocking, my God, et cetera, et cetera. During that time, that immersion, the woman to my right delivered the most remarkable oration. In fact, she orates what Joseph Holston captures in his painted and assorted work. And that is why I thought the woman to my right would be a remarkable addition to our immersion in this work. So, Jacqueline Allen Trimble is a professor. She's a chair of a department chair at Alabama State University. She is a National Endowment for the Arts poet, awardee. She has an assortment of pedigrees, and she has a lot on her mind. We're going to hear it. So without further ado, as they say, here we go.
Here. Cheers. Hey, y'all.
Yeah, that's mine, by the way. That's not yours. Mm-hmm. 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 There's only one of those left. There's one left on Amazon. One of her books. Would you like, should I give you a bit of background? Do most people, yeah, okay, all right. She chairs the languages and literatures at ASU, Alabama State University. Her reference points, in my view, are under her feet, the footsteps of generations before her in the slave trade and every excruciating era thereafter for blacks in America. She delivers a fusion of spoken word, personal narrative, and very pointed commentary about African American experience. And she's been acclaimed by colleagues and critics who call her voice bold, buttressed by poetic craft. She's also been described as a bald fist disguised as love. All right, I think that'll do.
We'll try it again. Hey, y'all. So I thought, since I had a wonderful morning at the Library of Congress and got to walk past the Supreme Court where there were lovely protesters, it was great. I took a picture. I would start with a poem called "What If the Supreme Court Were Really the Supremes?" Oh, how their bedazzled robes shine as they glide into the courtroom. Open wide, their satin-gloved arms flutter, their long store-bought eyelashes and croon. My world is empty without you, babe. Even Cindy Birdsong envies their hips, pop and sway, dip and snap, each one a lady. With these judges made new by the rhythms and the blues, the ooh, ooh, baby magic of a Motown spell, ever hold the sequined fish of my voting rights above their lovely bouffant heads, tip its iridescent scales toward the camera, then gut it like a dinner trout. So I used to get in arguments with people on social media. And I would try very diligently to explain things to them. Sometimes there were footnotes and references. It didn't seem to do much good. And so a friend of mine said, Jackie, stop arguing with these people. Go write a poem. And so a friend of mine asked, it was during the George Floyd protests and things were really wild. And so I'd gone to college with her and she asked, why are people burning down things? That doesn't make any sense to me. And I was going to answer her, but I decided to write a poem instead. And this is why people burning down fast food joints and whatnot. And it has an epigram, and that epigram I have to explain to you. So my field is actually American literature, and I teach African American literature and critical theory, among other things. But if you teach American literature, you spend a lot of time studying American history. So the epigram is actually from a historical document. And the document is the catechism. It's a catechism to be taught orally to those who cannot read. And it was originally particularly for the instruction of slaves. And it was originally put out by the Protestant Episcopal Church of the Confederate States. And so here's the epigram. It said, question, how do others sin against you? Answer, by cursing me, telling lies about me, or striking me. Question, what must you do to those who thus sin against you? Answer, I must forgive them. See, I learned my catechism well, learned to offer my cloak and coat, my cheek again and again as the skin was splayed from my body. I can quote Martin Luther King Jr. with ease, praise the Americana of his martyrdom, the sweet, unselfish beauty of that bullet's velocity. Shall I sing, we shall overcome, while I swing? I have wanted so long to believe in justice, to think of each blow as recompense for my wickedness. How can I continue? How can I continue? How can I continue to take and eat this image of myself, choke on the eloquence of my dissent, speak love fluently to someone with his knee on my neck, his bullet in my child? So,
Can we take a pause here for a second?
absolutely.
Let's just inhale.
Okay.
Wow. Read that a couple times before I heard you. It's amazing. Beautiful. Frightening. And one passage I would like to talk to you about, which is quite timely, which equivalent of what you said in much less eloquent terms, the bastardization of information, where there's lies that have been told so many times that it becomes common knowledge. And I think that's tragically what we're facing right now in these weeks leading up to the election. How, and you've extrapolated from so many past experiences that you've lived spiritually or historically or culturally, but not literally. How do you extrapolate in contemporary ways? So you're living here and at the same time this is happening here. Do you see?
Yeah, so I wouldn't say I haven't lived them. I have a poem called Another Thing to Worry About. I was 8 months pregnant and I had 2 children in the back seat. We were headed to school. And I was not even a block from my house. And a policeman, we had a blind corner, sped up the hill, and I had to swerve to avoid him. And so he pulled me over. And he just ran up to the car screaming at me. And he was just screaming. And so my instinct was to say, hold on. "You were speeding." And I said, "You were speeding," which just enraged him. And he sat there just screaming at me, and he said, "What are you supposed to do? What are you supposed to do?" Because it was a stop sign, which I had stopped at. He said, "What are you supposed to do?" And then he put his hand on his holster, and he was just screaming at me. And my children were in the back. And I thought, I wanted to argue with this man, but I didn't. I just got quiet, and I said nothing. He didn't ask me for my license. He didn't ask me for anything. He just stood there in the street screaming at me. So I put my hands on the steering wheel, and I just sat there. And he just walked off, got in his car, and sped off. And in the poem, I talk about, I wish I had said something back to him and become one more body on the pile. Because how many bodies is it going to take for people to understand? Not a month ago, my husband, who is 66 years old, retired, a veteran, was coming home from Chicago visiting his 102-year-old mother. And he was pulled over near Hartselle, Alabama, north of a notorious town. And they had him on the highway conducting an illegal search of his car. My husband does not drink, he does not do drugs ever, not even in college, not even ever. And so they kept him standing out there while they searched his luggage, his trunk, under his hood, in his wheel wells, all through his car, everywhere. And after 45 minutes, they turned to him because they could see when he gave them his license that he was retired military. They said, "Thank you for your service." And they asked him questions the whole time. But my husband said, he just stood there and said, "This ain't my first rodeo. I know how this goes." And they were trying to bait him, but they couldn't do it, so they just let him go. And so these historic moments.
This is recent and raw. This is
my life.
Yeah.
This is my life. And so when I'm writing about these things that are happening or have happened, I'm always connecting the past to the present moment because we're still living in that history.
So when you speak, most audiences who subscribe to coming, people walking through the door, want to hear what you have to say, or they're curious. Have you spoken, or do you speak to people who are perhaps not so receptive? And what is the response?
So, one of the interesting things about art is it's disarming.
That's right.
And it feels like even my kind of poetry that is very aggressive and this amazing art that we are looking at here, it does something to you and you can't deny it. It also forces you to let your guard down because you're looking at something at first you hope to be beautiful, but then it engages your mind, and then it may also engage your notions. So I was struck by several pieces in this amazing exhibit. One was the nude, one was the Madonna, which to me were both, I hate to interpret art in front of the artist, right? But both of those were speaking to me to classical representations of that, and were saying, this is a classical representation.
That's right.
Even though these are black bodies.
That's right.
And so, two nudes, right? No, nude, here it is. Madonna, we know that image. No, here's Madonna, too. And so that's making an argument, making a political argument, and my poems do that too. So I've had people in my audience who have totally different ideological bents than I do. But the biggest compliment I ever had was a man who came up and he said, you know, I never thought about it that way. Because I use humor, right? And it's a poem. And so I'm going to listen to this poem because it's not a political speech, right? And then people will start to think.
Let's do another reading.
So my mother is a very, what you would call, pale black woman. So pale that when she lived in Selma, and she was married to my stepfather, who is clearly a black man, she was chased through the town because they thought she was committing miscegenation. This was in the 60s.
Miscegenation.
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 She had consorted with someone not of her race, right? So I thought about that, and I was watching some crazy show, and there was a man there. His name is Craig Cobb. He's a white supremacist, and he was. They gave him a DNA test because he was trying to build a white town. And this is what he says. The name of the poem is called Counting Race. He says, wait a minute, hold on, just wait a minute, he said, trying to put on an all-knowing smile. This is called statistical noise. And this is Craig Cobb, white supremacist, disputing a DNA test result that he was 86% European and 14% sub-Saharan African. Oh, by the way, I love irony. Okay. Counting Race. Day after she walked downtown with her dark husband, her alabaster arm looped casually through his, her hazel eyes sparkling with laughter, my mother ran through those same Selma streets, down quiet sidewalks, across every friendly backyard until she reached home and the welcome of neighbors. The car of white men pursuing her wanted a word or two about her white legs, her blonde head thrown back, her fingers in his woolly hair. Too bad they couldn't see her blood. How can we measure one drop? By thimble or spoon, by paper bag or fine-tooth comb. Once the lexicon noted the count. Hexadecaroon, 1/16 black. Octoroon, one whole black grandparent. Mulatto, half and half. We don't like to talk of it that way. Or remember on the 4th of July that Sally Hemings quadroon, 1/4 black, bore Thomas Jefferson's 6 children. Or think of Strom Thurmond, rabid segregationist, taking the 15-year-old daughter of his maid to bed. How he hated miscegenation. Even his own blood in a mulatto daughter's heart could not sway his rant against her voting rights. How he loved untainted blood, as much as that man on the talk show yesterday who wants to build a white town for whites like him. He smiles beneath his certainty, his eyes calm as the Dead Sea. He does not know purity is a trap, as fake as gerrymandered districts and black-on-black crime. He does not know until the host tells him the parsing of his blood. 1/7 black, blacker than an octoroon, almost as black as my mother, child of a tobacco-colored man, mixed race, and a quadroon. I can't remember what they called that, or if I ever knew.
Wow.
So Amy mentioned that I'm a professor, I'm an English professor, and I was supposed to be writing an academic paper, and I wrote a poem instead. But
Seems to be a response to most things.
That's why I said, you said, what was my identity? And I said, poet, right? What else can it be? But I was thinking about in 1968, when you were going to Montgomery, Alabama, the number 1 and 2 show in America were, the number 1 and 2 shows in America were, 1, Gentle Ben, and number 2, the Andy Griffith Show. Gentle Ben was about...
Who can whistle that? Andy Griffith. There we go. Little musical interlude there. Okay, and
so my thesis was that in a time, in 1968, when there was so much civil rights unrest, et cetera, was going on, we loved these shows because they represented an America we imagined rather than the one that actually existed. Add to the fact that there were no black people in Mayberry, which is impossible if you've ever been to the Carolinas, but okay. So I wrote, and it became the thesis of my first book, is that America is a place where the happiness is like Disney World. It's built on something that's not real. American happiness. It used to be in Mayberry, folks were never colored, not even black and white, but beige, khaki, a little gray. In Mayberry, Deputy Barney had 1 bullet and no need for rope. The only burning he did was for his Thelma Lou. The sheriff had no gun, just an Aunt Bee baking pies and an Opie full of freckles heading off to fish or sing or court, whatever Opies do. In Mayberry, no doors were barred or locked. The jail was mostly empty. The only water hose we ever saw lay peacefully curled on Sheriff Andy's lawn. Mayberry was a southern town. Technicolor must have killed it. Made Andy a cranky lawyer, sent Opie running all the way to Hollywood. But we remember, black and white, from Chicago to Watts to Selma, we tuned in to connect the dots of Opie's face while we dined on mashed potatoes and buttered corn right before our TV sets. Mesmerized that in this southern town, the sheriff used his hose to water Aunt Bee's roses. We were so happy and relieved. We laughed until we could not think, until we fell off our sofas and wingbacks and cane bottoms. We laughed until we could not see or hear, until we could forget that outside our own windows, other sheriffs with loaded guns, snarling dogs, and ready hoses made quick work of a world on fire.
When was that written?
That was like 2015.
I open this up to questions because right now I'm speechless.
Yeah.
And you can just relax if you'd like. Yes, please. First, tell us your name.
I'm Tony Summerall.
Tony Summerall, and if you can't hear the question, I'll repeat it.
Can you repeat what you said about your poetry and what it does, like artwork?
Yeah, so I think art disarms us. We look at it or we listen to it or we watch it in terms of film and we let it in. We don't put up the barriers.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I was just gonna say that you, as an art major,
Yeah.
2 places in the world that I feel like I can totally be myself is in an art gallery and a church, and those are the only 2 places.
Wow.
So I just wanted to make sure that I heard you correctly.
Yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Really interesting comment. Anybody else want to add to it? Yes, sir. Please identify yourself.
Hi, my name is Lee. Hi. I'm wondering if beyond the African American experience, you've encountered people who've engaged with your work who are not African American from other communities who've been abused, marginalized, and they feel represented by the work that you do?
So I've got
Did everybody hear that question? Okay. The question Lee asks is in Jackie's work, has she worked with other communities that have also endured suffering and feel that they are somehow represented by Jackie's work as well? Is that a correct? Okay.
So I have quite a few poems that engage with other communities. I'm always very careful because I don't want to speak about other people's experiences. But I have a poem that I wrote called Ethnophilisms for the News.
Is it in your brain or on paper here?
Yes.
Please.
You want me to read it?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Who doesn't?
I think you will see, Lee, what I mean, because I have a good friend from Yemen, and she liked the poem a lot. Y'all be ready. That's all I can say about this one. I don't read this poem a lot because, it's.
If we could tolerate it.
I think this crowd can tolerate anything. I think this crowd can tolerate
Thank goodness
anything. If I
there's
can-
somebody in Bethesda could tolerate this.
Let's see if I can find it. So yeah, this started at, oh, wait a minute. I think it's in this book, maybe. That's what, I'm sorry. Grab it. So this started because, it was all the news reports. I thought about the news, and I thought, what if they read the news and said the word they leave out? And so these are news blurbs with the word stuck back in. It has an epigram, and it is from CNN. Baltimore City Councilman Carl Stokes' angry response to CNN interviewer Aaron Burnett's insistence on referring to black rioters as thugs. Just call them niggas. Just call them niggas. That's where that poem came from. Okay. Coons ran amok and burned down a CBS in Baltimore. A gun collector opened fire on an SUV, killing a young Spade for playing his music too loud. I felt threatened, he said, when asked why he had fired on the truck full of college spades. Statistics show a sharp increase in porch monkey on porch monkey crime. The National Science Foundation is funding studies of porch monkey brain pathology. Policemen in Ferguson shot an unarmed buck in the street. Other bucks nationwide were outraged. Investigators found a large history of violence against bucks, but officials noted the difficulty of keeping down the buck population. This market has long been ignored, the CEO said, as the world's largest cosmetic company launched its new line for natural jungle bunny hair. Products will appear in Ching Chong stores late August. A 12-year-old pickaninny was killed by law enforcement when his toy gun was mistaken as real. On social media, citizens defended the police. Pickaninnies are dangerous. You can't blame the cops for trying to defend themselves. What do you think? Tweet us at WVNS hashtag Pickaninny. Stopped for a traffic violation, a Shine ran because he was late on his child support payments. The officer shot him in the back, killing him. I felt threatened, the officer said of the fleeing Shine. A jigaboo has made history, winning the coveted award for Best Actress. I am so honored to represent all the jigaboos who never had this opportunity, she said. Her performance as Jezebel Jemima Brown chilled voters. So authentic, said one Academy member. Tar Baby and Spearjucker, joined by several local darky leaders, met with President Touch of the Tarbrush to discuss general unrest among the spooks as of late. Leaders are encouraging local ordinances against sagging pants and proposing new education programs to civilize the spooks. Tar Baby and Spearchucker will oversee distribution of funds. In foreign news, Congress voted to increase military presence in the Middle East. We've got to hit them now with everything we've got, said the Speaker of the House. The sand nigger threat is real and growing. Yeah, it's funny, but you don't want to laugh, right?
Right.
Yeah.
This brings me to a question, and I cannot remember the person who said this, but I do remember there was a question from this group that we were traveling with in Montgomery. And it could have been any one of us, because any one of us goes and sees and takes in as much information as possible. And at one point, a white person said to an African-American woman, God, you know, how do people push through? It's just an overwhelming feeling. How do people push through this intense guilt? And her response was very crisp, and she said, there is, in this instance, there is no room for guilt and respect. You have to choose. And I thought that was so, think about it. It was quite something. I choose respect. But think about this, very interesting. And I don't know if it was you who said that. What do you think about that?
I think that's absolutely true. I keep thinking about something that Carolyn Forche wrote in The Country Between Us, where she says to someone in El Salvador, she said, I feel so powerless. And the woman says back to her, you have no right to feel powerless. Better people than you have felt powerless. You know, and so
that's it. Mm-hmm.
yeah, and I think it's you know, it's like I've got a poem about allies, and I don't like the word allies, because you're either a soldier in the fight or you're not. You can't be an ally, because allies are just bystanders who are saying, go, go, go. But what people have to realize is the fight for equality, the fight for justice, is everybody's fight. Everybody's fight. And so you're not fighting for marginalized communities. You're fighting for yourself, because why in this country, where we say we believe in equality and justice and rule of law, why do we have marginalized communities?
Okay, question. This is a huge ellipsis you left. And we have so many marginalized communities. We also have so many communities that are fighting for themselves and are not marginalized. They feel under duress or threatened, or just feel they have a need to fight. These are communities. You can define community by religion, of course, and race and ethnicity and neighborhood, but you can also define it by a fight for Ukraine, or a fight for a peace settlement in the middle, or whatever it is. There are so many communities of thought that are so passionate and active in the United States now, that whatever divisiveness, this is my view, that we have seemed to have lived with for the past many years, it now becomes normal. That we just focus on what we need to focus on instead of the greater good. I wonder what you think about that.
Justice for all. If we have justice for all, you know, I'm a religious person. And so for me, if you love your neighbor and everybody's your neighbor, what's the big deal? I don't need to worry about what my neighbor is, you know, who my neighbor loves, or what race or ethnicity or religion my neighbor is, whatever. Just respect a person as a human being. And I think that, you know, I'm a humanities person, and every day I'm reading reports about the drop in humanities. Since 2009, there has been a 33% drop in humanities majors, because there's such a focus on, you know, you got to get a job. But I think it's a bigger drop than that. There's been a drop in empathy. And if you cannot feel empathy for somebody who isn't like you in any way, then you have lost the struggle to be a human being. And I think the fight we really are all engaged in is the fight for each person to be a human being. And I don't know how to fix that. I don't know what we should do about that. But I know that I'm going to try to live a life of empathy.
And have some sort of multiplier effect. Well, I mean, I think you have some sort of multiplier effect here. But that's your work, and that's I think we're fortunate to have heard it. Bless you. Let's hear from somebody, and identify yourself, please. Yep.
I'm Ellen Peckman.
Hi,
Thank
Ellen.
you very much. Thanks to both of you. Thank you, Mr. Halson, too. Thank God you're teaching. And, you know, we're living in a world where we hear us complaining about students, especially students who are speaking out,
Oh, yeah.
in ways that are shocking, forgetting that we raised these students to speak out.
Yeah.
And that they're speaking back to us is something we need to be listening to.
Mhm.
And there's all this revisionism about how it was, speaking out was better in the old days than speaking out now. Anyway, but more important, how are you able to nurture this flame that's within those students, that all this stuff around them is trying to erase and smudge away, and anti-social media
You must be a very effective teacher.
You know, I think,
What's your special sauce?
listening, talking to students, giving them information, because they live in a world where they get lots of sound bites, but not very much information. And so teaching them the importance of reading, holding their feet to the fire, making them, I used to teach my freshman comp course by taking a hula hoop and having a student stand in the middle. We can't do this anymore, but I used to do this 20 years ago. And we would shoot him with a super soaker if your arguments weren't good. So, and the whole point of that exercise was to teach you that arguments matter and that you had to back up the argument. And they loved that, you know. I said, wear something terrible, and we would go out on the green, and they would, the point was, and you had to be honest. You could not just soak somebody to soak them. If they couldn't, they had to defend their argument. I think my students gave me an earful Tuesday, and they are writing satires. And the things they're satirizing things like influencers. They're saying, oh, they're ridiculous. They're satirizing social media. They're satirizing all sorts of things that you wouldn't think that they would find ridiculous, and holding it up to public ridicule. And so they're smarter than we often give them credit for. I remember being a student. And so people who say, oh, these kids are so, aren't they?
Yeah.
You know, I remember being, foolish and saying crazy stuff. And I remember the day I told my professor Oedipus Rex was stupid. Because why would he do that? And I remember the day he said, Miss Allen, you have no soul.
Where is he now?
Yeah.
He retired, and when he retired, I took his place as the American Lit professor.
That is justice.
Yes.
Any questions over here? Please, your name. Yep.
I'm Patty, and I'm not sure how to capture this, but as a white person, in the community of people that are not as empathetic as you would hope, there's so much suffering, right? I feel as if so much of the pushback that we're getting in the country right now is that people have their own suffering and they see other people being acknowledged for their suffering and feel a kind of resentment. And maybe you see that more in Alabama, but I certainly saw that where I came from in Maine.
So
And I
give me
just-
that in one sentence.
It's like, how do you think about making it more universal, that empathy that you're talking about? Because there's, as a human.
Do you hear this? How does empathy become more universal?
Or, you know what I'm saying? Like, how
Oh.
do we connect people's individual suffering
Right.
with this larger suffering that communities are making visible these
So,
days?
so for me, empathy is universal. I mean, I don't say, oh, I have empathy for this little group. I think that's the problem. You know, I have empathy for people to be human, period, human.
Right.
And I think, well, here's the short answer, is that people who read, I hate to say it like this, people who read and study history tend to be more empathetic. People who read other people's stories tend to be more empathetic. And a lot of the trouble I see that we're having in our country and in the world is because reading has dropped off so much. You know, we're banning books, we're trying to limit curriculums, we're, you know, and so
AI is coming into play.
AI is coming into play. You know, it's a Gutenberg moment. It's a Gutenberg moment for us.
You had a Gutenberg Day.
Yeah, I had a Gutenberg day.
She was at the Library of Congress earlier today. Anybody else? Please, name?
Hi, I'm Nancy. I want to move back to the that dichotomy of respect and guilt.
Oh.
And but in listening to your poems, I would. But my question really is about anger.
Okay.
And in listening to your poems, I felt this deep sense of disappointment and pain and just shock, I think, about how people would be treated.
Mm-hmm.
But what I felt in your poems was not that anger, not the reflection of so much pain.
Right.
And so I'm just I just would like to know more about that, about how you manage that.
Love delivered in a balled fist.
Well, okay.
Remember that.
Well, if you would say more about that, maybe that.
You know, rage is a inspiration for me. You know, it keeps me writing. But you can't write. You can't scream. I can't just stand in the backyard screaming, because that's not poetry, that's not art. And I think what artists are great at doing is they're able to take those emotions, particularly rage, and they are able to condense it. You know, Eliot, what did Eliot say? Squeeze the universe into a ball.
Joe's over there nodding in agreement. Yeah, he's nodding. Everyone, that's Joseph Holston. Yes, he's a beautiful artist, amazing artist. Yes. This is the guilt respecting is it's very hard to make those inextricably. I mean they are linked. They must. I find it impossible. However, I'm going to really focus on the respect, because the guilt doesn't go too far. That's dragging you down. It's amazing because obviously, well, this as Beth knows, a documentarian who's about to ask a question. As Beth knows, and we all know, we read the newspaper, listen to the news if we can stand it, it's nonstop. And the prognosis among us newsmakers or news coverers or writers or, thought leaders like you is not too good. Beth.
I was so struck by
Beth Mendelsohn.
I was struck by your story.
A little louder.
I said I was struck by your story when you were talking about when you got pulled over by a policeman. And I had just seen a film this weekend called The Nickel Boys. I went to a screening. A very, very powerful movie about this young man who's hitchhiking and in Tallahassee, who gets taken to this penitentiary called the Nickel Penitentiary. That's black boys and white boys. And it was one of the most brutal and profound films I've seen about the 60s. It was so difficult to watch and so uncomfortable. But the gentleman who was taken in always kept this spirit of hope alive in him. And I thought the film was so interesting. And I was so struck by what you were saying and how the film really showed how he was able to really go through this, but he tried to look at the humanity in the situation and with his man he becomes friends with in the film, about how they saw a world that they would have to live through to get to the other side of it. And I was struck by that, and when I was listening to you, it's like you've been able to sort of integrate about how to get to the other side and how to embrace that. And I recommend it as something you might want to see, because it was one of the most powerful things I've seen in a long time.
And the name of the film, Beth,
It's
is
called Nickel Boys.
Nickel
It's
Boys. Nickel Boys. Did we hear most of that?
It's coming out.
Sort of,
It's just
yeah.
coming out, but
Yep.
But I think that based on the privilege of listening to you tonight, it was something that would resonate to you, because it had a very similar message to what you're saying.
Yeah.
I wanted to share that with you.
Yeah. Who among this group, and you don't have to, if you don't want to identify, anybody read poetry here? On a regular, frequently or, semi-frequently? Yeah, yeah.
Read more poetry.
Talk about the impact of poetry and how can you use it as a force? Because there's a good chance that you could be, on a very, you could go national very soon. Inshallah. Yeah.
We live in hope. So, to me, poetry is a condensed way to say something. It's like it's a medium that we can use that is often short. It disarms people. People can read it quickly, and then they can. It sort of is a gut punch, in a way that fiction is much more leisurely, but that poetry is kind of like boom, boom, boom. And so that's why I like it, because you can have that turn all of a sudden with that jab. And so I love poetry for that. I think there are more people writing poetry. I think poetry is a medium of protest. That when the times get troubled, the poets come out and start singing, right? And we can see that over and over and over and over again.
Do you walk around like writing in your head?
Yes. All the time.
Some of us hear music, you're like
I hear
in
poems.
stanza.
I do.
Question on what you just said, because that really is of the essence now, which is people acting up pre and during and post-election, and hate and extreme violence becoming, it is a serious threat. We've had a lot of discussion here in the gallery with various folks about that. What do you think?
I think
And pardon me, how can the spoken word somehow impact that?
I think that one of the things that literature does, or all art really, is it makes us sometimes examine ourselves, and it holds up a mirror, because that's all my poems do. They just hold, everything I write about is what I see reflected in the world. It's what I see in the world. And I think that sometimes all we need is for somebody to hold up a mirror and say, look at what you look like. It's not really good, is it? Stop it. And so that's what I hope. And there's so many people out there writing, doing spoken word. I participated in, I guess I shouldn't say something political, but in a Poets for Kamala.
Oh, please do.
I participated in a Poets for Kamala. That was so much fun. It was great. And they're just having them everywhere, all over the country, raising money for Kamala. And
Poetry slams, is that what they call them?
we did it on Zoom. Yeah. And we raised $3,000, which we thought was pretty good.
That's great.
Not a lot of money, but. So I think the poets we are doing our part. We are trying. We are trying.
Any other questions or comments? Yes, again, Lee, of course.
What ideas or events in history do you find incredibly important and understudied?
What are events in history are incredibly important in Jackie's view and understudied?
Events and ideas.
Events and ideas.
Events and it is. So the Harlem Renaissance was a political movement. I think a lot of people don't get that or understand that. And so we study it as this artistic renaissance and all this wonderful art came out, but that really was a political movement. It was a way to get this, like 3 generations out of enslavement, to try to fast track African American people into the mainstream of American life. And it would have worked if the Depression hadn't come along. And I think thinking about that as a political movement would be great. I think the civil rights movement, the way we have studied the civil rights movement, has been too sentimental. And if we would study it, like I heard a young woman talking like, I'm not ascribing to that Martin Luther King, nonviolence, somebody hit me, I'm gonna hit them back. But I'm saying, like, I guess you don't understand that Martin Luther King was a military strategist. They figured out what would be the most effective thing to do. I mean, they didn't just go to towns to march. They went to towns where they knew people would cut the food. And they could get it on camera, and people would be appalled. This is a strategy. This is not just, this kind of thing. And so I think we have not studied enslavement enough in terms of the economic bounty that it provided this country. I hear people talking about, the great inventors of the early 20th century, but where did the money come from? And if we would begin to talk more about it. And so, in the colleges, this is what we do. But to the general public, they have we have not done a good job of telling the story in a way that people can connect the dots.
Very, very difficult to do, generally
Right.
speaking, but now with all this crap coming over that's not real and is consumed as real and believed as real, it's very, very hard. It's very hard, first of all, to mainstream all of the diverse groups in America. It's very, very hard.
It is.
And then now we're battling disinformation. It's coming over much, much more powerful than the real stuff we're trying to record and get people to read and understand, and that's it. Yeah, it's frustrating, and
But not
thank goodness
impossible.
for you. No, it's not impossible, and thank goodness. Let's look at some of these books because they're impossible to get right now. But she's very popular. Apocalypse. This is really beautiful. How to Survive the Apocalypse. When did you write this?
That came out in 2022.
Yeah, and it's fabulous. I highly recommend it. And then there's American Happiness. Yep.
That came out in 2016.
2016. And our intention was to have a whole pile of books for her to sign, but they're not available. Yeah.
Well, when will
Very
they be
popular.
available?
Yeah, we're looking for them to be available again. Yeah. Jackie, is there something I didn't ask you or bother you about that you'd like to say?
No.
I want to say one thing. The reason is obvious now why we have Jackie sitting here and the Holston sitting to her right. And this is really, for me, a fulfillment of a huge and beautiful wish to have you here and to complement Joe's beautiful work with your remarkable and I'm still stirred from the last time, but you truly orate what Joe captures on paper and on canvas, and it's a beautiful fusion. So thank you, and thank you. We're going to see and hear a lot more about this woman. You just know that you saw her here first, okay? Thank you all for coming.